In this video, we're going to be attempting to enumerate and then connect to an insecure blob storage container in Azure. And what I mean by insecure is just a blob storage container that allows anonymous access. I've set up a target blob for this. And we're going to be using microburst to do this. So let's get started. We're not going to import the whole of the microburst module. It could take some time, but in this case, we just need a single script, the invoke enumerate Azure blob script. And once imported this, all we need to do is run this command like invoke enumerate Azure blobs. And then the base is just what we're just telling it to enumerate all public blobs you can find that have the word VOT in them. And VOT is the name of our target tenant, VOT International. And since we're hoping at least one public blob will be found using with that name. It does take some time when running, and sometimes it will error out. You might see some red output. I believe it's going to do that in just now. But don't panic if you see this. Just let it finish. It usually does finish successfully, even if it sometimes shows error messages. Now, there we go. But as you can see, it's still running, so nothing to panic about. So if it does find a storage account in the target tenant, it will then try to enumerate any containers within that storage account. We can see it's actually already found a storage account, which is the VOT backup storage account. This URL is just a default URL that Microsoft gives you when you create a storage account in Azure. And within the storage account, it's found this container named config. So we're actually we're gonna copy this whole URL, the VOT backup blob core blah blah config, because that's what we're going to need to connect to the container. To this, we're going to use Azure Storage Explorer, which is a free tool it's developed by Microsoft. You can just Google it to get it. It's free. It doesn't need any payment or accounts to download. Then when you want to connect to something, we're going to use the connect dialog. There are various ways to connect to storage accounts and storage services in Azure. If you just wanted to use a typical username and password, we'd use subscription. You can use tokens and such things. But in this case, we're trying to connect to a blob container, which we had enumerated. So we're just going to use a blob container option. Again, you could use a username and password, but remember, this is an anonymous blob container. So we're going to click on anonymous. We're going to paste the URL that we found earlier, but because blob storage is a service that's primarily accessible over HTTP or HTTPS, you actually do need to put in the full URL. So we're just going to append HTTPS before the full URL. As you can see, it's actually pre-filled. It's the config, which is the name of the container in this case. We didn't have to do that. And in this case, we do take this warning seriously, especially in the real world. Like, I know this is a container I've set up. I set it up for this demo, but because basically anyone around the world can create storage accounts, can create containers with any name they'd like to, you need to do your homework, your recon, to just be sure that the container you're connecting to does belong to an organization that you have consent to target or to assess. And yeah, because there's really no way the tool the microburst won't necessarily tell you that this container or storage account belongs to your target organization. It's up to you to figure that out. All right. So now we're good to connect. So we're just going to hit the connect button. And it does take a little time, but it's because it's connecting over the web. But we should see it's connected storage account and connected to containers. And there's a config container. And within the config container, we have two files, web.config and web.config.back. These are just web.config files. They're usually configuration files for IIS web servers. So we're going to try and download and open the file just by right-clicking and hitting open. In the real world, you usually do want to look in these files. I mean, so it's a bit of an old trick or an old thing for pen testers, red teamers, and the like, but these files do tend to can have sensitive information in them, depending on the environment you're assessing, how well things have been configured. whenever you do find a web.config file, you want to look in the connection strings section, because sometimes you will find hard-coded clear text credentials, like in this case, where we do say that there actually is clear text credentials for an IIS user with a pretty secure password, but again, it's in plain text, so it's not that secure, is it? So you always want to look in the connection strings section. You can often find user accounts, Active Directory accounts, database accounts, but it depends again on the server. What we're doing here is using the user. We're trying to see if this is actually a valid user in our target tenant. We have to actually have put in the full username and email, which is we had already enumerated from the previous steps, which is isuser@portint on Microsoft.com. Then we're going to put in the password, see if this is actually a valid credential for a user, for the user. And yeah, easy peasy. Just like that, we can see it's a valid user. I just set this up for the sake of, a successful demo. In the real world, you might not find something as damning as, a username and password. It could be something, you know, useless, like just a picture or a video file, or it could be something even worse, like a plain text a script with admin credentials in that. We've seen that happen in a lot of breaches, so it actually is a legitimate thing. So you always want to enumerate, target anonymous blob storage files. You never know what you'll find, but of course be careful and make sure you're always connecting to storage accounts that you have consent to connect to. Over here, I'm just verifying that we actually are connected to the target tenant as the IIS user. So no need to open this. Just wanted to prove that we can do it using just a PowerShell script and Azure Storage Explorer.